Hello, everybody. Before we start, just a few logistical slides. As you can see on the slide, the webinar will be recorded, and we will also make it available on the social media channels of all of the partners who are organizing this session. Your microphone will be muted so that we can ensure the quality of the session. We hope that there will be a part for questions at the end. And the emphasis on questions and not so much comments, questions. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. So the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. Mention if you want me as a moderator to bring in your question, but if you want to intervene too, we can try and make that happen. Captioning is also available. You can activate it by clicking the live transcript and caption buttons on the Zoom panel at the bottom of your screen. So again, show captions, at least I have it on my screen as show captions in English. So that is made available too. And we also have international sign language interpretation. We will start in 1 minute. Alejandro, you can start.
Oh. Oi. I'm sorry. Okay, seems it's working. Thank you very much, Tom, and welcome everyone. My name is Alejandro Moledo. I'm the Deputy Director and Head of Policy at the European Disability Forum, the organization bringing together the European disability movement. And I welcome you to this webinar about the last deliverable of the Disability Employment Package, one of the flagship initiatives of the current strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities. And when we talk about employment and in the framework of this disability employment package, we tend to just focus very much on the persisting issue for persons with disabilities to access the open labor market, and we focus very much and we talk mostly about the unemployment rates. You all know that there is an employment gap of 24 percentage point between persons with disabilities and without disabilities. And this percentage have not, unfortunately, improved much in the last years. There are some EU countries, such as, for example, Croatia, in which this rises until 41 percentage points. So the added value that, in our point of view, had the disability employment package was that it was not just looking at only the percentage of persons with disabilities employed. It was acknowledging that the barriers that persons with disabilities face to access employment are multiple and are very diverse. So the different deliverables of this package address different aspects that should be taken into account, providing some useful recommendations and guidance for member states to boost and finally address these rates that I was referring to. However, as I said, we shouldn't just focus on the employment gap, but also to look at other elements, like to look at, for example, the number of people with disabilities in full-time employment, for example, or the wage gap between persons with disabilities and without disabilities, which, as you all know, is is great, as well as the high rate of in-work poverty as well. Um, so all these elements should be taken into consideration as well when we talk about employment, and not just how many people with disabilities are in employment. And when it comes to the alternative models, the alternative employment models, which is the topic of today's webinar and the last deliverable of the disability employment package, the study that will be presented today, it is important to talk about the nuances. So it is important to look at what kind of what types of alternative models are there that actually, on the one hand, respect the quality of the employment conditions for the persons with disabilities working there, and also their support and their success in transitioning towards the open labor market, which, according to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, this is the end goal that we should aiming for. And it is important to understand these nuances and to see which models actually work better than others, because even if this webinar is not going to talk about policies and we are not going to dive into specific European legislation and so forth, as we often like to, I think it's important that we have this knowledge and this information and these nuances, as I was referring to, because very soon we will be discussing about public procurement and the reserve contracts under public procurement. We will be discussing about state aids. We will be discussing about European funds and where this fund should be used for. So it is important to understand which models are more useful and which models are successful in boosting the participation of persons with disabilities into the open labor market. So I really hope on behalf of EDF that this webinar is informative. We appreciated very much the work of Empirica and the colleagues working on this study that we've contributed through as well through the disability platform with the European Commission's expert group on disability policies. So we hope that this study will be as useful to you as it will certainly be for us in our advocacy towards employment of persons with disabilities. So many thanks to the co-organizers, our fellow co-organizers, and I pass you back the floor, Tom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alejandro, for setting the scene there. I am Thomas Bignell, Secretary General of the European Association of Service Providers for Persons with Disabilities. This session is organized with the Inclusive Labour Market Alliance, which was set up a few years ago now to work on joint advocacy, but also to work on sharing information between different organizations. And ESPD is a part of it, the European Disability Forum too. We also have the European Platform for Rehabilitation. NC is part of it, Workability Europe, and the Association of Supported Employment in Europe. So again, it's let's say, one of the umbrella structures at European level where we try and coordinate our work and our advocacy and our knowledge sharing at European level. So we're very glad to be here today to present this study done. But before we go into, let's say, the details, I would like to introduce Katarina Ivankovic-Knežević, who is Director of Social Affairs at the European Commission and the person behind really the Disability Employment Package. Katarina, the floor is yours. Can you tell us a little bit about the Disability Employment Package and where we are now?
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Thomas. Thanks a lot, Alejandro, for your opening and for inviting us and not only for inviting us, but also many thanks to Inclusive Labour Market Alliance for organizing this webinar. As Alejandro said, the webinar is to disseminate the study, which is the last deliverable of the Disability Employment Package. I would dare to say of this phase of the Disability Employment Package, because I'm sure there are many more things to come in the years to come. So, but let's focus on the study today. The Commission's objective with this study was to dig deeper into alternative employment models. We know that quite a large proportion of persons with disabilities, and in particular those with severe disabilities, do not work in the open labor market. We have heard some figures, and it's quite challenging, I would dare to say, in all the member states. Many of those persons with disabilities that are in some kind of employment often work in so-called sheltered workshops. We also know that those workshops differ a lot. They differ with regards to the application of the labor law, and not all of them are considered employment. While we have been developing the package, which focuses on all stages of employment, we could thus not omit the employment in alternative settings. Our objective was first to learn about the legal and organizational frameworks, also to learn and to see the impact of those settings on employment and social inclusion of persons with disabilities, and to see and to reflect on the transition to the open labor market. We were also hoping that we will come up with some acceptable definitions and categories of alternative employment, and you will hear a bit about it later. And we are very much aware how challenging this study was, in particular in the context of the UNCRPD comment number 8, which was on the segregated employment for persons with disabilities, such as sheltered workshops, is not to be considered as a measure of progressive realization of the right to work, which is evidenced not only in employment that is freely chosen or accepted and performed in an open and inclusive labor market. So this was also the starting point when we started reflecting on this topic. The consultation process was very lengthy, but we do see the benefit. We see that all key actors have been consulted and reached, the agreement was reached. On this, I have to congratulate to those who have been implementing the study and who have been doing the research, because it was not an easy exercise, and you have done a great job. I'm also very pleased that the study presents supported employment models as a model example in employment in the open labor market. Needless to say, we in the European Commission, we do strive for quality employment of persons with disabilities in the open labor market. And this is going to be our main agenda driving forward the disability employment package and activities related to the disability and the employment. As you know, European Commission has many initiatives either put forward, like Union of Skills, where skills of persons with disabilities play a role and are addressed. But this year we will see the Quality Jobs Roadmap. To speak about Quality Jobs Roadmap without mentioning what are the quality jobs when it comes to the persons with disabilities, for me, this is not acceptable. We simply need to link the persons with disabilities with the quality jobs. Also, this year we will be proposing our new pillar action plan. It will come towards the end of this year, but the consultations will be open quite soon, I believe, in days or weeks to come. And then also a very important topic, which is the first ever EU anti-poverty strategy, which we will start preparing already. Well, we have already started preparing, but we will do many consultations and run the consultation processes from, let's say, June until mid or end of October, where persons with disabilities also do play important role linked to employment and employment of persons with disabilities. In-work poverty, addressing this in-work poverty is something that we consider very important. So I wish there are many other things I could tell you about affordable housing plan, etc., but there will be opportunities to reflect and discuss those. So I wish you a very successful webinar. once again, thanks a lot to those who have delivered this amazing, and I have to say it's an amazing piece of document and amazing study. So thanks a lot. And I'm just inviting all of you to disseminate the study further to your networks because it's really, really great. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Katarina, both for these kind introductory remarks. Also because I think without you, we wouldn't be where we have here with the disability employment package. Of course, the Commission is never about one person, but still it helps to have such a person, such a leading role, pushing for the rights of people with disabilities, and in this context on employment. So thank you, Katarina, for that. And I'm sure you can count also on us for the upcoming work you're doing on the quality jobs roadmap, as well as on the union of skills. It's good to see that we're not just, relying on reports and things like that, but we also want to make concrete progress moving forward. So thank you, Katarina, for being here. Now we're moving on to the more technical element of the session, which is really to dig deep into the research. The report or the reports, because it's more than one report, are very long, very in-depth, as they should be on such a complicated topic. But we will try and break it down as simply and as quickly as possible, first through, let's say, a presentation by the researchers and by Monica Haber, and then we'd have some time for some Q&A. So again, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and I will try and bring you in afterwards. When I first heard about, so I've been at ESPD for over 10 years now, and I think it's the experience of many of my colleagues in the other networks. We go to national level, people are struggling with a system that they have in place, and they always ask, what works in different countries, what doesn't work, where are the trends, are we behind, are we ahead? And it's always quite tricky to be able to do that exercise, in particular because we lack really strong data. And therefore, when this report was sort of announced, let's say at the beginning, we of course really welcomed it. On the other hand, it was a very, very, very tricky exercise because it's already tricky at national level. Sometimes it's already tricky at regional level to really try and understand the systems. So across European level, wow, we were looking forward to seeing what would the output be. But luckily, we had a great team. We had Monica Haber from the Commission and Carsten Gaheis as a researcher who sort of were looking into this and were behind the scenes. Monica and Carsten, can you briefly introduce yourselves before we get to the technical questions? Monica?
Yeah, so good morning, everybody. My name is Monica Haber, and I work in the European Commission DG Employment with Katarina and her directorate, and in the unit dealing with poverty and social inclusion. And I am personally responsible for the file of employment of persons with disabilities.
Thank you, Monica. Carsten.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas, for having me. So my name is Carsten Gaheis. I'm working for Empirica, which is a research consultancy and basically a body which has been, an organization which has been doing quite a lot of research studies on behalf of the Commission or supported financially by the Commission on social inclusion, also inclusion especially. And I should add here that I'm not the only author of this study, but we have done this together with the Sozialhelden in Berlin, which is a social innovation think tank of disability advocates, which is always tries to put the finger on how things can become better and what the challenges are, and we have done this study together. I'm very happy that we were able to do so, and that's as much as I want to say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's get into it. There are quite a lot of studies at national level around this topic. Not enough, but there were quite a few. There's very, very few at European level, and for sure there's very, very few with such scope and depth as is this report. Can you tell us a little bit about the scope, the sample, the methodology, let's say the process behind this study, and what your ambitions were at the start?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll start and then I'll give the floor to Karsten. So a lot has been said already by Katarina. We, at the level of the European Commission, we knew that a lot of persons with disabilities work in sheltered employment, and especially persons with severe disabilities. We knew that these workshops, these employment models differ from one member state to another and even within the member states. And we knew that not all of those workshops or employment models provide effective transition to the open labor market. But this was more or less everything that we knew. We did have some punctual knowledge here and there, but our objective was, as said by Katerina, if we looked into employment of persons with disabilities and improving employment of persons with disabilities in general, with the objective to focus on the employment in the open labor market, we needed absolutely to assess the state of play of alternative employment models. So this is the first question we wanted to answer. So we wanted to do a mapping on the state of play in Europe. Of course, ideal would be to have in-depth study of all of the member states. However, we are always limited by the budget. So we try to focus on a sample of 8 member states that would be good enough to present different types of employment models. But also we wanted to answer some more specific questions. And the questions concern the implementation of the labor law, because not all those workshops implement labor law. The status of the employer, which is obviously linked very much with the previous points, the impact of the sheltered workshops and how to assess the impact of the sheltered workshops, and what is the transition to the open labor market. Then we, as I said, we looked into in depth into all into eight member states. What's happening in those member states, including to cover all the points that I've mentioned already. And then we also wanted to have some good practices. And so the report, as said by Thomas, includes not only the study, but includes the detailed country cases as well as good practices. And I now give the floor to Karsten to tell you more about methodology.
Yeah, I just want to add as a disclaimer, you have already pointed that out, Monica, that we were not able within the budget available to cover all of the EU. So we selected, with some reasoning behind it, we selected 8 countries. So apart from Austria and Germany, also Ireland, Italy, Lithuania, Netherlands, Spain, and Sweden. And we selected these countries because, they all represent to some extent a certain approach towards labor inclusion of persons with disability. Having said that, we are aware of the fact that we, of course, are missing out of many things from other countries, from other member states. So that should be taken into account when reading through the document. We did also, especially within the work on the case studies, we looked further afield. So we looked at all of Europe. Basic methodology was, of course, we looked into the research evidence, which is available from all of Europe and beyond, especially on the impact of alternative employment models for persons with disabilities. And then we looked within each of the countries. We looked, of course, very closely to the data which is available. We found that especially the comparability of data is quite an issue, quite a challenge. So that also needs to be taken into account. So many of our also figures we have come up with are estimates based on available numbers, data. But that is also going to be featured again in the recommendations we will come up with. So I just want to mention here with the methodology, we then asked stakeholders at EU level and in each of the 8 countries to validate, to give us feedback on our findings. Having said that, again, we didn't have the budget to do a proper stakeholder dialogue as it's in the books, let's say, within each country. But I think we are positive that we have covered the field quite well in each of these countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Only last week I was speaking to a colleague who works in employment in Flanders here in Belgium on concepts around protected employment, sheltered workshops, open labor market employment. And I've been doing this for 10 years and I'm still, largely still, it's not completely clear for me again around all these concepts because it really depends on each country, depends on the relationship of the open labor market on the individual and so forth. And so when it was asked of the researchers to try and define all these concepts at European level, it's I think a very tricky task. But you've done it, or you've given it a go. Clearly very important for the future as well in terms of defining legislation and so forth. So can you tell us a bit about how you proceeded in terms of defining these concepts? What were the challenges and what were the outcomes of it?
So again, let me start. Thank you for this question. Indeed, this was, I would say, the most challenging part of the report to really dig into the definition, trying to categorize the different models of alternative employment. And I have to say, we dedicated quite a bit of time. We had a lot of discussions, and this was very important and very timely in the context of the UNCRPD comment number 8, because if we need to take stock of this comment, we really need to know what we're talking about and what's happening in Europe. And we of course know there are a lot of players. So there are public providers such as Samhall in Sweden. There are NGOs, the NGO providers. There are private providers. There is social economy. There are a lot of different players. And at the end, what we decided to do is to bring them all together and somehow discuss it and agree. And I'm very happy to say that we've reached this sort of a very broad consensus that of course was extremely challenging for Karsten and his team, but at the end we know that we in our study we married all the different interests and viewpoints. And I give the floor to Karsten now.
Yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, as you already hinted at, defining alternative employment models is quite challenging. So first of all, we need, of course, to have an understanding what are we talking about when we talk about alternative employment models. So what this means, according to our definition, is then, or it refers to jobs which are designated for persons with disabilities, which means it is something else than the kind of therapeutical activities with persons with disabilities, like daily activities and so forth, which are not really operating in the labor market, and they are not really productive in the sense that products and services for the market are being created. And on the other hand, we're also not talking about jobs in the open labor market. So alternative employment models here refers only to that part of the labor market which is limited then to persons with disabilities. And this usually comes in the form of sheltered employment, which means that jobs are taking place in some kind of protected environment. We have struggled, I must admit, to come up with a consensus about the definition of sheltered workshops. You will see a lot of confusion about that, especially at national level, whether actually the kind of models, the kind of types of organizations are then to be referred to as sheltered workshops or not. So our suggestion is here to limit the term sheltered workshops to those organizations which do not give persons with disabilities a regular employee status. Often that means workers are defined as service users, as it's the case in Austria in general, rather than employees. And they typically come with very low remuneration. And this kind of alternative employment model then also meets the definition of segregated work, as clearly pointed out in the CRPD and in the general comment number 8. Usually these organizations are operated by not-for-profit entities. In opposition to that, we talk about work integration enterprises. If we talk about sheltered employment providers, which do give workers a regular employee status, which also means then access to a minimal wage where that is applicable, and or to collective bargaining. This does include, but is not limited to, work integration social enterprises, the well-known WISEs, but it also includes then for-profit firms which are operating under specific national regulations, as it's the case, for example, in Germany and Austria. The situation is made more complicated by the fact that there are also external workplaces which are being used by sheltered workshops and also by work integration enterprises as defined before. So this means that people remain within their employment work contract, but are then temporarily placed within companies, organizations operating in the mainstream labor market. And these external workplaces are either individual workplaces or they come in the form of mobile units where groups of persons with disabilities then are being placed in mainstream companies. So, this is our understanding of alternative employment models. We did, as indicated before by other speakers, then we did also cover supported employment, which is not part of what we see as alternative employment models, but it's an important aspect of actually, if we discuss about pathways to the open labor market from sheltered employment situations. So employment in the open labor market can and is often then supported by supported employment and related approaches. Related approaches here means that we're not only talking about supported employment as it's been defined, as it's very strictly defined, for example, in the United States, but it's also defined by, for example, the Association of Social Employment Europe. But we also talk about related approaches like individual placement and support, IPS, and other forms of job coaching and so forth, which might be then used as standalone solutions then in some countries. So important to know, so if we talk about this study, so we looked at alternative employment models, but then also quite much at supported employment as one obvious option to include more people in mainstream labor market situations. Okay.
Thank you very much. Clear, I think there's a lot of depth behind each of those definitions, I'm sure. So maybe we can go into that in the Q&A. What I sometimes experience, at least when I go to have these discussions at European level, in particular European level, is that people have understandings of certain concepts, but don't recognize the trends and the advances that have been made. So, for example, everyone sort of sees sheltered employment as what it was maybe 40 years ago. Not everyone, but there were some people maybe 40 years ago without recognizing the differences. So can you tell us a bit about the prevalence of each model? Where are we in each country around the dominance of sheltered employment, supported employment, so forth? And can you tell us a little bit about the trends that are taking place in that regard?
Yes. Yeah, I'd like to do that. So just look at, I mean, first of all, there is certainly the ambition or the need to some extent, or the desire, so is a better word to be used here, to then associate different employment models directly with the level of segregation as it's been defined or outlined in the CRPD, which would mean that, okay, we can say sheltered workshops are always segregated employment and WISEs are always non-segregated employment, but this is not really possible. I mean, one reason why that is not possible is that we all have an understanding of what the criteria are for segregated employment, but the CRPD and also the general comment number 8 do not really provide us with an operational definition, which means that there are, I mean, I said before, sheltered workshops are always to be considered segregated employment, but this is not the case for work integration enterprises, WISEs, and and for-profit work integration enterprises. So some of these might need to be considered as segregated employment, others not. And this is not something which can be done easily. So you would need to look at each and every case to really figure out. And in any case, you would need an operational definition. So that is something which is certainly being required, and I will come back to that later. You said, yeah, you asked for some information about the spread of alternative employment models. You see here for our 8 countries, the total numbers as well as a percentage. This percentage is of the entirety of working age persons with disabilities, for which then the SILC data is used, for those of you who know what that is. And just, I mean, the percentages are not to be taken are not very important here. So for example, in Germany, only persons with severe disabilities are eligible for a place in a sheltered workshop. So this 3% figure doesn't say much. It doesn't give you much information per se, but it does give you some some idea of the importance of these models. So you do have sheltered workshops in Austria, in Germany, and also still at an experimental stage in Lithuania. And you do have work integration enterprises in all of the 8 countries we have looked at here. What I find especially striking is then if you try to compare then the number of persons, the relative number of persons in sheltered employment versus persons who are in supported employment schemes. So these are obviously estimates. So especially if it comes to supported employment, it's pretty difficult then to come up with or to square the data which is available then to any kind of definition you want to apply. But in general, you can say that especially in some countries, especially in Germany and Spain and also Lithuania, you have much larger numbers of persons with disabilities in sheltered employment than persons in supported employment schemes. And on the other hand, you have other countries like Austria and Sweden, which make a lot of use of supported employment. So obviously then pathways to the open labor market have been successfully then implemented and are being used. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I may have a question for you afterwards around these points and the details of how it comes. So again, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We have one already from Fabrizio that I will mention later. So an important part of all these discussions going beyond the theoretical and trying the definitions is actually the impact that it has on the employment of people with disabilities. In particular, how maybe different models in some ways provide support in different ways and have different outcomes. Can you tell us a little bit about your perspectives around these areas? Are some models maybe better at some elements than others, et cetera, et cetera? What's the way forward? You're muted, Gaston.
So I'm now unmuted again. Okay, so there is some evidence on outcomes. I wouldn't say that there is sufficient evidence, but the studies are available, especially on pilot projects and so forth. So and obviously the picture I'm going to give here in a few minutes is very patchy. So it just tries to give an overall idea. So when you look at sheltered workshops, there are actually many surveys being done which show that the majority of persons placed in sheltered workshops are satisfied with working conditions. So it's not the case that they all feel or experience exploitation. There is an exception here. So usually there's much less satisfaction with payment, which, yeah, of course, is understandable because remuneration usually is very low. There are extensive support structures available. Social Security is usually being provided for. So that's also, I mean, we do not find evidence for exploitation, which sometimes is pointed at in the media discussion. So that is not necessarily the case. And also, I think here it's important to acknowledge that, for example, in a country like Germany, which has a very strong sheltered workshop sector, where the origins of this sector, so if you think back of the history of Germany in the 20th century. So we had the Nazi dictatorship, when people, especially with intellectual disabilities, were killed off. So after this period, of course, there was a very strong need to establish then protective structures, and this is something which the sheltered workshop system has been doing very successfully. However, we have very poor performance regarding transition to open labor market. So although sheltered workshops are actually are required on paper to care for transition to the open labor market, the actual figures which are available indicate a very poor performance in that regard. When it comes to work integration enterprises, it's quite difficult to come up with generalizations because of a huge diversity within countries. For example, between the profit and the social enterprise sectors in countries such as Spain, we certainly have examples of very high impact types, especially within the WISE sector. We also have in countries where these models are tightly regulated, like in Germany.
Sorry, Carsten, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What do you mean by high impact types?
So that means impacts in the sense of social inclusion, of perceived social inclusion, of breaking down barriers between persons with disabilities and without disabilities, and so forth. That's what is meant here. We do have, for example, when it comes, there are studies in Germany and Austria, for example, about so-called Inklusionsunternehmen, which also show high satisfaction. Again, here we have a poor performance regarding transition to open labor market. So in general, this still seems to be not necessarily a dead end, but it tends to be then not really a pathway to the open labor market. And there is an exception here, which is the system in Sweden, where actually the government then foresees certain transition rates, which are then also being met with usually with success by the state-owned work integration enterprise somehow. When it comes to external workplaces, again, there is evidence that they are effective in enabling greater social inclusions of persons with disability. Especially, they manage to get people within society at large, so rather than just to lock them away in workshops. So that's certainly something which where there is evidence available. However, unfortunately, there is again very poor performance regarding transition to regular employment contracts in host companies. So usually these workplaces are much less temporary than they should be, there seem to be some barriers, also often disincentives for host companies then to take on persons with disabilities who have done some kind of work experience or some kind of whatever kind of external workplace experience within their company. Now, about supported employment related approaches, there is strong evidence for positive impacts regarding longer-term inclusion in the open labor market. And this is especially true for schemes that follow strict implementation guidelines. That is the case for individual placement and support, where there are very strict implementation guidelines, but it's also the case for companies, organizations that follow the quality guidelines of the Association of Supported Employment Europe. On the other hand, I'm talking about here not only about supported employment in the narrow sense of the term, but also about related approaches. So in some countries, for example, job coaching is provided as a standalone solution, more or less standalone solution. And often also the kind of support is provided merely on a temporary basis. And these show a limited success. So obviously supported employment needs to be done well, needs to be managed well to really then bring the kind of positive impact which is asked for. There are certainly budget implications that limit a stronger rollout. I would say here these are short-term budget implications. So first of all, you would have to come up with some financial structures which allow then a greater rollout of these models. On the other term, there are at least indications in the research literature which show that in the longer term, supported employment can be a very good investment from basically all concerned at the national and also public budget level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gustin. Impressive to see how you managed to summarize such, because in the report these are pages and pages of input and quite technical elements, and summarizing it in such short space of time is very impressive. Thank you. The study also concludes with some general recommendations. Can you let us know a little bit what those recommendations are?
Certainly. As I indicated earlier, so I think that's something which the study has not done. We would have loved to be able to do that, but it was not possible within the means we had available. So, and I think it's certainly also a policy question. So there need to be a policy dialogue about that to agree on an operational definition of segregated employment as it's being then indicated or mentioned in the CRPD, and especially in general comment number 8. So there are some indications there, but it's not really enough to point out. If you take one example of for example, a work integration social enterprise, whether this then should be classified as segregated employment or not. I think this would then enable member states to monitor progress towards compliance with the UNCRPD, and also this would also enable them to devise effective systems for data collection, as you have pointed out earlier, Thomas. So there is pure data. The data availability is generally poor. For example, in countries like Italy, where there are many examples of impressive WISEs operating for persons with disabilities, but where there's totally a lack of a picture of the overall shape and also of the impact of these kinds of organizations. So emphasis should be placed on effective transition to the open labor market, but also it needs to be taken into account that sufficient levels of support still need to be provided. That is something which some countries which have experimented with moving away from the sheltered workshop system have experienced, so that persons are also at the disability advocacy community there is not satisfied at all with the kind of support they then get to when they are asked to take up jobs in the open labor market. And I think we should learn also from the kind of support which is available in these traditional workshops, then to get an idea of what kind of support needs to be provided then once people are in the open labor market, so are further removed from support providers. The potential of supported employment is certain, and related approaches is not being exploited sufficiently at all. So it should be much better exploited. Much more use should be done here. And this also asks for exchange of best practice in supported employment and related approaches, including for persons currently in sheltered employment. So it's often that persons who get the chance to actually make use of supported employment, that they have not been placed in sheltered employment before. And still, it's the case that in most of Europe, once you're placed in sheltered employment, this tends to be a dead end. I mentioned good practices. This is something we have done, and this is also with which I would like to finish my presentation here. We have also done research into good practices, successful alternative forms of employment, 10 of which we have identified. So we are not, we didn't have the ambition to look for best practice, that it would have required a much larger data collection, but we are certain that the kind of practices we have identified here do represent good practices from which a lot can be learned for other countries, for other providers, for other experts, researchers, and so forth. And again, we have done also 10 good practices for effective pathways to employment in the open labor market. One pathway obviously being then provision of supported employment structures. So I want to finish with that, unless you, Thomas, have directly some questions.
Great, thank you very much. I have a quick question first. There was a lot of, in let's say the more sheltered side of things, that there's an argument that often comes up, which is transitions to the open labor market is very poor. And I wondered if there was any research or anything that came up as to why that's the case, and how it's possible maybe to overcome these challenging transitions to the open labor market. Is it the model that's wrong, or is it the type of support that's being provided which is maybe not suitable? I mean, what's behind the scenes when it comes to those transitions from more sheltered into let's say mainstream businesses?
I think what you can say in general is that supported employment is not really promoted as an alternative option to persons with disabilities. So that also comes back to the overall social security system within each of the countries. So you do have in many countries you have more or less pre-given pathways from sheltered education to sheltered employment, and persons within each of the countries, they are not aware of other options. So that means that promotion needs to be stepped up a lot. And I also think that much of what we have found indicates that sheltered employment providers need to be asked much more, or incentivized much more, to open up pathways to the open labor market, which of course also means that those providers lose maybe their most productive employees, the most productive staff, which means that proper incentive structures need to be put in place, so that actually the current system, which in some countries, if you think of Germany, the countries I represent, are very much entrenched, very deeply embedded, that these needs to be broken up, and without actually any negative impacts in the sense of that support structures are being then lost completely, which is certainly something we do not want. Thomas, you're muted.
Indeed, I knew it would be my turn at some point. So now we're going through a few of the Q&As in the box. So I don't know who between you, Carsten, or Monica will be answering. The first question is from Fabrizio Fea from Rome. How can the so-called cooperatives in Italy be defined within the list of alternative models?
Yeah, they would be then part of the work integration enterprises. So as I understand, the cooperatives are always non-profit, so there would be work integration social enterprises, and that is so. For example, in Italy, in Italian language, use is being made of the term sheltered workshops for at least parts of what these cooperatives are doing. So that is something, just for clarification, I think we should move away from, so that we, and our suggestion for these definitions I presented earlier. And the reason is, of course, that these cooperatives are provide employees with standard employment contracts, and also with access to collective bargaining, for example.
Indeed. I think so. Going through the questions, I think there will be some questions for Monica. So just for you to, if you're listening, to come. So those more for the Commission, I assume that are coming up. There's a question from Des Henry. Is there a difference between work integration social enterprises and work inclusion social enterprises? I mean, is there a concept around work inclusion social enterprises?
Yeah, this comes back to the discussion we had quite lengthily. I think also in the call for tender for this study, there was still mention of the term inclusive enterprises, which you might have realized we do not use at all anymore, because we realized there was a lot of confusion about this term, at least if you turn away from the national to the European level. So because many people consider inclusive enterprises any enterprise which is socially inclusive, or it can operate in any part of the labor of the employment market. So that means inclusive is something which is more normative. So we strive towards inclusiveness, but it's not really something we can use very well for operational definitions. So we don't use the term work inclusive enterprises at all. Having said that, for example, then in Germany you have Inklusionsunternehmen, which would then be part of what we define as work integration enterprises. And in Germany, they are usually for profit, not always, but many times. So there would not be work integration social enterprises, but always work integration enterprises.
Thank you, Carsten. So now there's a question probably for Monica, and it could be more conclusion, but I think we still have a few minutes. So what are the next steps with the Commission now around the disability employment package on your side of things?
Thanks for this question. So we are currently in the sort of brainstorming phase. We have been concluding the first phase of the strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities. We had a dialogue, constructing the dialogue with the UNCRPD, with also some recommendations that the Commission has and other institutions have received. We are currently discussing those recommendations and also brainstorming on how they will be taken up by different DGs, because obviously it's not only for DG Employment nor for DG Justice. But we will continue definitely the work in the context of the disability platform. The disability platform, for those of you who don't know, is a network of the key stakeholders from across Europe, including the public authorities, EU experts, national experts, civil society organizations, also social partners. And there is a dedicated subgroup on employment, which definitely will be continued. And this year, in a brainstorming mode a little bit, but definitely we will focus on other areas. And one of the area is definitely supported employment, because I believe this is a very good way to help persons with disabilities, and especially those with severe disabilities, to have employment in the open labor market. So we will work together with stakeholders, as we've always been working, to make sure that whatever we will come up with is something that is needed and is something that will be very practical. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monica. And your European networks are also involved in those discussions with the Commission in terms of providing input into what, from our side of things, what could help us do that. When it comes to supported employment, I would always remember, I think late last year, I was in Hungary, and they had a conference on the employment of people with disabilities, and it was one of the concluding panels, and everyone was asking each member state representative, so national government representative, typically a minister, innovations in their sector. And I think there was 3 or 4 countries, and the 4 countries all mentioned basically the sheltered workshops, which have been in place in those countries for many, many years. Now, they can play an important role, but I was shocked, I think, that no one had mentioned once supported employment in that context. So I think there really is a, not to take away that there is a role for sheltered employment, but equally the complete disregard, or at least in that session, at least, for supported employment is also something that we need to look into, because it's also something that we need to change, I think, dramatically. Not to oversimplify the discussion, but really that appears to be also a political issue. I'm trying to go through all the questions. There was one around that I found very interesting from Joanna Lehmann from Germany. Fully agree with the need to continually develop the sector. When it comes to the transition to the open labor market, the active involvement of social partners, in particular employers, is essential, because again, in some ways the blame is always put on the the sheltered employment sector, rather than trying to understand actually why employers, mainstream employers, are maybe not recruiting enough. So what, in your opinion, can be done to enhance employer engagement in this process? I don't know who wants to answer that.
Maybe I really need to say at this point. So we only, I mean, because of the time available at this webinar, we only I only mentioned some of the recommendations we had. So I really invite you to have a look at the study, at the main report, where we have then more detailed recommendations. And certainly one recommendation is then also targeted at employers. So I really would like to avoid the impression that it's only the sheltered employment system which needs to change. That is not the case at all. So there's a lot of stigmatization still around, and a lot more needs to be done on behalf of on the part of employers to overcome stigmatization, to overcome some ideas of what persons with disabilities are able to do, and what kind of investment is asked of them. And I think there are some good examples, and I think that's something where I would highlight then the example of the Netherlands, where then there were some really large-scale national initiatives to bring together then all these stakeholders, the social partners, and then to make them to commit to certain targets, also numerical targets, when it comes to inclusion of persons with disabilities in the general labor market. So I think that is something which needs to be done much more, so that persons so that employers then commit themselves to a certain objectives, certain targets, and then among themselves need to figure out how they are going to actually reach these targets. For that, these targets obviously need to be ambitious enough. But so I think really much more needs to be done by employers. But on the other hand, you do have quite a tight labor markets in many parts of Europe. So I think the timing now is quite good. So there's a lot of demand for labor. So I think if not now, whenever should employers start with that.
Thank you, Carsten. So again, look at the study. There's a lot more depth to what's been presented today, in particular on the recommendations, which we will be looking at future. There's a question, a kind of tricky question, but I think an important question in terms of competences on legislating around these issues. The United Nations recently did a report, maybe an opinion, I don't remember the technical word, basically giving its opinion on what the European Union should be doing around the UN Convention. In that, it did say that effectively the EU should not be funding in any shape or form sheltered employment, including through its legislation around state aid and public procurement. This is a very sensitive question, very tricky question. Where do you stand, Monica, on that? To which extent, what is the role of the European Commission when it comes to these issues?
Thank you very much. It's very difficult for me to answer this question, because currently, as you all know, probably, or some of you know, the revision of the public procurement directive is ongoing. So indeed, it's a very sensitive question, and not a lot can be said, because we are in the process of, again, reflecting internal consultation. But definitely, at my level, I have a very good understanding of that. But as I said at the beginning, there are a lot of different players. There is, as we've seen, there is a lot of confusion. We cannot just square the circle. We have to take it case by case and be very, very careful in how we approach the topic, and that's the approach in general.
Thank you, Monica. Indeed, there are many discussions at European level now, because the EU Public Procurement Directive is being reviewed, state aid probably next year. And whereas I think everyone agrees that it's about using these tools to improve the employment of people with disabilities, there are quite debates. Is it the role of the EU rules or public procurement, for example, to force change at national level? or should that reforms happen first at national level, and you have the European legislation that's there to help? So these are discussions that are ongoing at European level, and so I'm sure through your European networks, if you're interested and to share your opinions on this, please don't hesitate. And Monica, I see you want to come in.
Thomas, yes, if I just may add something, because what we are trying to do, at least in DG Employment, is to now move a little bit towards assisting member states with the practical implementation of all the package guidelines. So the call for funds under the ESF Plus Easy will be very shortly announced, and I just wanted to draw your attention to that. So we'll be financing the transnational practices.
Fantastic. Now there's many questions. That's great. I'm trying to follow up. But I think one that really stood out for me is from Ofir Peleg. It's the second question there, if you can find it. So as an organization that operates supported employment with an over 75% retention rate, it is also a service that's typically relevant to people who are both confident in their skills and educated in vocational training to work. We meet many who are yet scared or not ready to work. Do you have information about individuals who are not yet prepared for this scheme? So in some ways, the question is, and it's a question that appears very often, there's nothing new to this. Can supported employment help everyone? Are there limitations to this? And what are are there some tools that are better suited to some individuals or not, depending on how ready they are for work? Again, a very tricky question, but at the end of the day, it's probably the most important one.
I would reply to that. I mean, there can be a little question that a job in the open labor market is not for everyone. So so there are persons who need a high degree of protection, and very specific working environments. So I think, and that is also something. I mean, the sheltered employment sector, as I've defined that, we define that in the study, I think is catering for quite well. So I think we need to avoid then the giving the impression that just everybody can be sent on the open labor market with a few lightweight support offers, and that's it. I think that's just not realistic. And so I think my point of my suggestion, my proposal would there be then to start with the kind of things which people actually appreciate in sheltered environments, and how these can be then replicated in the open labor market. So more or less than to provide some of the services, the support activities and structures which are currently being provided within sheltered environments, then more or less on the job, on the fly, then 2 persons placed in the open labor market. And I think that's something which the supported employment approach is striving to do, but I think much more work needs to be done there. And I do think there are budget implications. So if you do not want to invest more in this particular target group, I think there will be, yes, strict limitations to what you actually can do.
Thank you, Justin. One last question before we finish, because well, we all need lunch. From Stef de Kock in Flanders, so that's a Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. A person with a disability can get a support package, which includes like subsidized wages, job coaching, and so forth, with any employer, effectively. So the individual can get the support that can be applied with any employer, but it can be a work integration, can be McDonald's, can be any type of employer. So in some ways, it's a full choice that the individual has. I think that's the nature of the question. Could this approach not transcend the semantic discussion around protected, sheltered, open employment? Meaning that ultimately, if the individual with a disability has equally the same right to the same package, irrespective of where they work, does that bypass many of these discussions? So quite general question, philosophical in some ways, but actually a reality in Flanders.
But I mean, generally, I agree, and I cannot speak about Belgium. I haven't looked much into the situation there, but I think you really have to start from the lived experience of persons with disability. And often, I mean, like in Germany, there are offers for transitioning from sheltered workshops to supported employment available, but they are being taken up by, I mean, very, very small numbers of persons. So obviously there are incentives, disincentives in place, which do not make this a realistic option for persons with disabilities. So I think just offering these support packages might not be enough. You really have to you have to look closely into what options persons with disabilities then realistically experience as available to them personally, and I think that needs to be added. But of course, that's a good start to it needs to be in place, these structures and these offers, but it's certainly not sufficient.
Thank you, Carsten. Monica, I don't know if you want to say some last few words before I pass the floor to Alicia.
No, I think I agree with everything that has been said. I think one of the main, for me, you know, whenever discussion I participate in about employment of persons with disabilities, I think a lot of it comes to raising awareness about persons with disabilities, about their potential, about what's available, because there is a lot of resources available on national level. There are legal frameworks, there are policy frameworks, and I think we have a huge homework to do on raising awareness about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica and Carsten, for presenting the reports. For everyone else, please read the report. But before concluding this session, Alicia, you have some concluding remarks. The floor is yours, Alicia.
Thank you very much, Tom. I hope you all hear me and see me well. My name is Alicia Gomez Campos. I am the Secretary General of EPR, the European Platform for Rehabilitation, and we are also one of the partners of ILMA. So I would just like to very briefly conclude this webinar by highlighting that it's clear that this study underlines the important diversity of alternative employment models for persons with disabilities and support programs that exist across Europe. And we have seen in this webinar how the study provides an important conceptual framework that is quite complex, good practices, case studies, and key recommendations, which are really important to promote quality employment for persons with disabilities. So from all the ILMA that we said is the Inclusive Labour Market Alliance partners and colleagues, including EPR, I'd like to thank the European Commission for joining the webinar, and of course for putting employment of persons with disabilities really high in the agenda of the current disability strategy, which with what is, I believe, and I'm sure we all agree, a very successful and busy disability employment package, and for issuing this study. And of course, thanks to the report authors from Empirica and Sozialhelden for presenting the study today and the key findings. I think that we agree, all the ILMA partners, that we appreciate very much the Commission's effort to closely involve key stakeholders in the delivery of this and the development of this study. So I think it's important to thank the European Commission about that as well. And to say that with this webinar, we wanted to help in making this study known, to share it, to disseminate it, to inform about it, so that it can have a real impact, no? As Thomas was saying already, both influencing the work that service providers have, but also making an impact in shaping future policies at a national level in Europe on employment of people with disabilities. So we take this moment to make this call here, and for all of you to share the study, to make it known, to use it and make it useful. So you know what they say, sharing is caring, so let's make the most out of it. And of course, I just finished by thanking all of the audience that has joined the webinar today with a really active participation through the Q&A. And thanks to the colleagues of VASPD for taking the lead in co-organizing the webinar. The webinar has been recorded, as it was said in the beginning, and is going to be shared through the different ILMA partners, websites or channels, and probably led by SPD on that task. So thank you very much, everyone. And from my side, just wishing you a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.